The autumn rain tapped against the cracked window, filling the small apartment with a restless rhythm. Rebecca Martinez shifted on the sagging couch, her arms cradling 6-month-old Diego, who fussed softly as if the storm outside unsettled him too. She rocked him gently, her voice carrying a faint lullaby her grandmother once sang to her, the melody trembling as it slipped through her lips. The baby's whimpers eased, but Rebecca's own heart pounded harder, each note tangled with the sound of bills fluttering across the coffee table like fallen leaves. No one had bothered to sweep away. She glanced at the red notices stamped across envelopes past due. Final warning, eviction pending. The words burned her eyes. She smoothed Diego's tiny blanket with one hand, whispering, "We're going to be okay, mi amor. Mama will figure something out." She pressed a kiss to his forehead, inhaling the faint scent of baby powder, as if clinging to his innocence could somehow shield her from the shadows closing in. The apartment was quiet except for the rain and Diego's soft coos. The television in the corner hadn't worked for months, a silent reminder of everything they lost when Marcus walked out. 3 months had passed since he disappeared with promises he never kept, promises of steady work, of a future together, of sharing the weight she now carried alone. At first, Rebecca believed he would come back, that maybe fear had driven him away and love would guide him home. But as days turned into weeks and his side of the closet stayed empty, reality cut deeper. Marcus was gone, leaving her with nothing but unpaid rent, empty cupboards, and a baby who depended on her completely. Exhaustion pressed heavy on her shoulders, but beneath it flickered a stubborn flame of resolve. Rebecca had learned quickly that despair solved nothing. The diner shifts barely kept food in the fridge, and even then, she often skipped meals so Diego wouldn't. Every dollar was stretched like elastic pulled too tight, threatening to snap at any moment. She'd walk to work in worn shoes, smile at customers who left no tips, and still return home with enough tenderness in her heart to hum Diego to sleep. Yet tonight, as the rain poured harder, she felt the looming weight of something worse than under the eviction notice, taped to the door that morning. 10 days. 10 days to catch up on rent or pack up everything she owned, which wasn't much, and face the unknown. She traced the edge of the paper absent-mindedly, her other hand resting protectively on Diego's tiny back. The storm outside felt like an echo of her own fears, loud, relentless, and threatening to break through the thin walls that kept them safe. Still, as Diego shifted and his dark eyes met hers, something in Rebecca hardened. He deserved more than cracked windows and second-hand clothes. He deserved laughter, warmth, and the security of knowing his mother would always fight for him. She leaned closer, her whisper fierce despite the tremor in her voice. "I promise you, Diego, I won't let this world break us. Tomorrow, we'll find a way," and with that promise lingering in the air, the first light of suspense stirred. Tomorrow meant job hunting again, wandering the city with Diego in his stroller, facing judgmental stares and closed doors. Tomorrow meant chasing hope through streets that rarely welcomed girls like her. Tomorrow meant risking everything on the slim chance that somewhere, someone might see her worth. Rebecca closed her eyes as the lullaby faded. The storm raged, the bills waited, the eviction loomed, but in that moment, she chose to hold only one truth, the fragile heartbeat of her son against her chest. Steady and full of a future she refused to surrender. Asterisk, the morning broke with a pale October light that seeped through the blinds, falling across Rebecca's weary face as she sat hunched at the kitchen table. The storm had passed, but its echoes lingered in the puddles dotting the cracked sidewalks below and in the heaviness pressing on her chest. Diego stirred in his stroller, bundled in his thin blanket, his dark lashes fluttering as he dreamt of a world far gentler than the one waiting outside. Rebecca sipped from a chipped mug of instant coffee that tasted more like burnt water than strength, yet it was enough to push her forward. Today had to be different. Today she would not return empty-handed. Her fingers brushed across the stack of resumes she had printed at the library, a dozen copies on thin, grainy paper. Each one felt like both a lifeline and a desperate plea. She had circled job listings in the classifieds until the ink bled, but her eyes lingered on one in particular, Hartwell and Associates, administrative assistant. It was a name she had heard spoken in reverence across Riverside, a fortress of glass and steel where men in press suits carved out fortunes, while women like her cleaned tables for scraps. It felt impossible, but what choice did she have? She folded the resumes into her bag, kissed Diego's soft hair, and whispered again, "We're going to be okay. Just trust Mama." The city was alive as they ventured out, A tide of commuters in black coats and polished shoes sweeping past her. As though she were invisible, Rebecca pushed the stroller carefully, weaving between strangers whose glances slid over her like raindrops on glass. She felt the contrast like a wound her thrifted jeans against their tailored suits, her second-hand sweater against their pressed shirts. Every step echoed with the silent accusation that she didn't belong here. Yet she held her chin higher, even as the chill stung her cheeks. As she neared the towering facade of Hartwell and Associates, Rebecca slowed. The building loomed like a monument, its glass walls reflecting a city that thrived while people like her drowned quietly on the edges. Through the windows, she saw receptionists in sleek blouses and executives carrying leather briefcases, their voices clipped with confidence. For a moment, she almost turned back. What could she offer these people? A tired single mother with no degree and a baby in tow. But then Diego cooed softly, his small hand clutching the blanket, and she knew she couldn't retreat. She had to try, just as she reached the gleaming doors. A sound pierced through the hum of the city, raw, uneven, and heartbreakingly human. She stopped in her tracks. A child was crying. Not the whine of impatience or the fuss of a spoiled tantrum, but the deep, ragged sobs of someone carrying a weight too heavy for their small shoulders. Rebecca's heart clenched as she turned, her eyes finding the boy sitting alone on a polished wooden bench near the entrance. He was perhaps 8 or 9, his navy blazer immaculate, khaki pants unwrinkled, shoes polished to a shine that spoke of privilege. Yet his face was streaked with tears, his green eyes red and swollen. He tried to cover his cries with his hands, but the sorrow broke through anyway, echoing against the marble walls of the plaza. Rebecca hesitated, torn between the urgency of her job hunt and the pull of her instincts. Every second she delayed was a risk. What if the receptionist turned her away for being late? What if this was her one chance slipping away? Diego shifted in his stroller, gurgling softly, as though sensing the boy's pain. Rebecca's decision crystallized in that moment. She couldn't walk past. She pushed the stroller closer, her voice gentle. "Hey there, sweetheart. Are you okay?" The boy lifted his head, startled, and quickly wiped at his tears as though ashamed to be caught. "I'm fine," he mumbled, though his voice cracked with a lie. His gaze flicked nervously toward the building behind them. As if afraid someone inside might see him, Rebecca knelt beside the stroller, lowering herself to his level. "It's okay to not be fine sometimes," she said softly. "What's your name?" "Timothy," he whispered after a pause, his voice small. "Timothy Hartwell." The name struck her like a spark. Hartwell, the same name etched in silver letters across the tower that loomed above them. This was no ordinary boy. This was the son of the most powerful man in Riverside, a child born into wealth and status beyond her imagination. Yet here he was, crying alone like any other abandoned child. Rebecca's chest tightened as she offered him a tissue from her bag. "That's a strong name. I'm Rebecca, and this little guy is Diego. He's 6 months old and thinks everything is fascinating." Almost on cue, Diego reached a tiny hand toward Timothy, his fingers curling in innocent curiosity. The boy's lips twitched, a fleeting smile breaking through his tears. "He's really small," Timothy murmured. "He is," Rebecca said, her own smile faint but real. "But he's tough. We both are." She paused, her eyes meeting his. "Do you want to tell me what's making you so sad?" "Sometimes talking helps." Timothy hesitated, his small hands fidgeting in his lap. The silence stretched, filled only by the bustle of strangers hurrying past and the distant honk of traffic. At last, his voice trembled out. "My mom. She's been gone for 2 weeks. Dad says she's on a business trip, but I heard the housekeeper talking to the cook. She said Mom left because she couldn't handle our family anymore." Rebecca's breath caught. His words were simple, but the pain in them was sharp enough to cut. She looked at Timothy and saw herself not in his polished clothes or privileged life, but in the hollow ache of abandonment, the same Juan Marcus had left in her heart. In that moment, it didn't matter who he was or what name he carried. He was just a child who had been left behind. She placed the tissue in his hand and whispered, "I'm so sorry, Timothy. That must be really scary." Her hand lingered on Diego's stroller, her resolve deepening. She didn't know it yet, but this choice to stop, to care, to see him was the first step into a story that would unravel everything she thought she knew about her life. From the gleaming glass walls above, the city looked small. The investment tower of Hartwell and Associates stretched into the autumn sky, its reflective windows mirroring the storm clouds drifting overhead. On the 24th floor, behind curtains of steel and marble, Alexander Hartwell stood in silence. His figure, tall and rigid in a tailored charcoal suit, was the kind that made boardrooms fall quiet. He was the man people feared to disappoint, the man who could end careers with a single clipped phrase. Yet now, he wasn't looking at contracts or stock charts. His eyes were fixed on the plaza below through the spotless glass. Alexander saw his son sitting on the bench outside, and beside him someone else. A young woman with tired eyes and clothes that spoke of struggle. She was kneeling by Timothy, her stroller angled close, one hand steadying a baby and the other offering his son a tissue. Alexander's jaw tightened. His son was not supposed to cry in public. His son was not supposed to appear weak, and yet, the boy's face, streaked with tears, softened when the woman spoke. Timothy even smiled faintly at the baby's small hand reaching toward him. A flicker of something long buried stirred in Alexander's chest. Memory. His late wife's laughter when she used to rock Timothy as an infant, humming lullabies into the night. That warmth had died with her. He had buried it beneath steel, ambition, and the brutal climb to the top. And now, watching his son, Alexander felt something unravel, something he didn't want to feel down below. Rebecca had no idea her every move was being watched. She sat on the bench beside Timothy, sensing his loneliness without pressing him to heart. She listened, really listened, as he spoke about his mother's absence. She offered words not wrapped in money or empty promises, but in simple humanity. It was the kind of listening Timothy never received in his marble halls, filled with nannies, tutors, and staff paid to keep him occupied. Rebecca glanced toward the building, feeling the pull of time. She still needed to step inside, still needed to submit her resume, still needed to beg for a chance. Yet something about this moment felt more important than a job application. Diego cooed in his stroller, his small presence bridging the world's hers, filled with cracks and unpaid bills, and Timothy's, lined with privilege but hollowed by absence. Inside, Alexander's assistant entered quietly, a folder in her hands. "Sir, the board is waiting," she said. Alexander didn't answer at first. His gaze stayed locked on the scene below, his knuckles pale against the edge of the desk. When he finally turned, his voice was low but edged with steel. "Cancel the meeting. I'll deal with them later." The assistant froze, stunned. Alexander Hartwell never canceled meetings, but he had already turned back toward the window, his sharp eyes narrowing as if trying to read the young woman's every movement. Who was she? Why was she here? And why did she seem to reach Timothy in a way he himself could not? On the plaza, Rebecca finally rose from the bench, brushing her palms nervously against her jeans. "I have to go inside, Timothy," she said gently. "But remember, you don't have to hide your feelings. It doesn't make you weak. It makes you human." She gave him one last smile before adjusting Diego's blanket and heading for the glass doors. Timothy watched her go, something shifting in his small chest, a spark of hope he couldn't name. And high above, his father's expression hardened with an unspoken decision. The poor girl with the baby was about to walk straight into his world, and Alexander Hartwell intended to find out exactly who she was. What Rebecca couldn't know was that every step toward the doors tightened a web of power and scrutiny around her. Inside waited polished receptionists ready to judge her appearance, managers eager to dismiss her, and eyes sharper than glass waiting to test her worth. And behind it all stood the man who had already seen too much, the CEO, whose life she was about to change, even if it meant shattering her own. Asterisk, the lobby of Hartwell and Associates was nothing like Rebecca had ever seen. As she stepped through the revolving doors, clutching Diego's stroller tightly, the sudden hush of wealth wrapped around her like a suffocating cloak. The marble floors gleamed under chandeliers that spilled golden light, their crystals scattering rainbows across polished walls. The air carried the faint scent of expensive cologne, leather briefcases, and money. Every sound, heels clicking, pens tapping, voices trading sharp sentences about deals, seemed to remind her she didn't belong. Rebecca smoothed her hair instinctively, tugging her second-hand sweater closer. Her heartbeat quickened as she approached the reception desk. The women sat there, their blouses crisp, their manicured nails flashing as they typed with effortless speed. One of them looked up, her eyes immediately falling to the stroller. The pause that followed was sharp enough to sting. "Yes?" the receptionist asked coolly, her voice clipped. Rebecca offered a hopeful smile and held out her resume. "I'm here to apply for the administrative assistant position." Rebecca Martinez, the receptionist's gaze flicked from the paper to Rebecca's faded jeans, then to Diego, who was cooing softly, unaware of the tension. The woman's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. I'm not sure this is the right environment for you. Her colleague leaned closer, whispering something Rebecca couldn't hear, though the glint in her eyes said enough. They were amused, judging, ready to dismiss her without a second thought. Heat rushed to Rebecca's cheeks, but she steadied her voice. I just need the chance to be considered, please, before the receptionist could reply. The sharp click of expensive shoes echoed across the lobby. A group of young men in tailored suits strolled past, their laughter echoing off the marble. One of them slowed as he noticed Rebecca, his smirk curling with cruelty. Did we open a daycare in the lobby now? He said loudly, glancing back at his colleagues, who chuckled under their breath. Guess Hartwell's really diversifying. Rebecca's fingers tightened around the stroller's handle. The laughter was like nails against her pride, each sound threatening to undo the fragile dignity she had stitched together. She forced herself not to respond, not to break. But Timothy's small voice rang out suddenly from the bench outside, cutting through the mockery. Leave her alone. Asterisk heads turned. The boy stood in the entrance now, his green eyes flashing with defiance. The laughter faltered, uncertain. Timothy's presence, his name, his unmistakable identity hung in the air like a blade. The Hartwell heir had spoken, and the room shifted. The receptionist straightened instantly, her expression tightening. She looked at Rebecca differently now, no longer with open dismissal, but with wary calculation. If you'll excuse me for a moment, she said. Taking the resume and disappearing toward the elevators, Rebecca exhaled shakily, torn between gratitude for Timothy's courage and dread at what his intervention might mean. She bent down to adjust Diego's blanket, whispering, almost over, "Meammer." But it wasn't, not even close. High above, Alexander Hartwell had already given instructions. His voice carried over the phone, cold and precise. Send her up. I want to meet her, now. The receptionist returned, her polite mask forced into place. Mr. Hartwell would like to see you personally. Take the elevator to the 24th floor. The word struck like a thunderclap. Rebecca blinked, unsure if she had misheard. The CEO himself wanted to see her. She glanced at Diego, then at Timothy, who gave a small, almost secret nod of encouragement. Her pulse pounded as she pushed the stroller toward the gleaming elevator doors. Inside, the mirrored walls reflected her trembling hands, her tired face. The stroller with its frayed edges. She didn't look like someone who belonged in this tower. She looked like someone about to be swallowed whole by it. As the numbers climbed, so did her fear. What did the CEO want with her? Why had he summoned her? Asterisk, the elevator chimed, and the door slid open to reveal a hallway lined with dark wood and silver accents. At the far end, double doors loomed, guarded by silence. A secretary gestured toward them with a nervous tilt of her head. Mr. Hartwell is expecting you. Rebecca swallowed hard, her throat dry. She pushed the stroller forward, every step echoing against the walls. The handles of the door were cold under her fingers as she pushed them open. Inside was a world of power carved into mahogany and glass. The office stretched wide, with a panoramic view of Riverside's skyline. Behind a massive desk stood Alexander Hartwell, his presence filling the room before he even spoke. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, fixed on her immediately. Rebecca froze under his gaze, feeling the weight of a man who had built empires with iron will. She didn't know it yet, but the moment their eyes met was a spark that would set both their lives on fire. Asterisk, the heavy doors closed behind Rebecca with a muffled thud, sealing her inside a world that felt impossibly distant from the cracked apartment she had left that morning. The silence pressed in, broken only by the faint hum of the city beyond the glass walls. Diego stirred in his stroller, letting out a soft sound that echoed louder than it should have in the cavernous space. Asterisk, Rebecca's eyes were drawn to the man standing near the enormous window. Alexander Hartwell didn't move at first, his silhouette sharp against the skyline, hands clasped behind his back as though he were carved from the same steel and glass that built his empire. When he finally turned, Rebecca felt the weight of his gaze. His features were hard, every line of his face carrying the authority of a man who was used to being obeyed, feared, and respected. So, his voice was low, measured, and cold. "You're the one who stopped outside." Rebecca tightened her grip on the stroller, her mouth dry. Yes, I saw your son was upset. I just wanted to help." The corners of Hartwell's mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, something closer to disdain. "You think my son needs help from strangers on the street?" The words cut sharper than she expected, but Rebecca lifted her chin. "He needed someone to listen, she said quietly, and in that moment, it happened to be me. A flicker of surprise crossed his face, gone as quickly as it appeared. He circled slowly, like a predator considering prey, his polished shoes whispering against the mahogany floor. You bring your child here, into my building, asking for work, and at the same time, you involve yourself in my family's affairs. His gaze shifted to Diego, who looked up at him with wide, unknowing eyes. Something unreadable flickered there, but Hartwell smothered it. Tell me, Ms. Martinez, is this desperation or audacity? Rebecca's heart pounded, but she refused to drop her gaze. Maybe both, she admitted, but desperation doesn't make me dishonest, and audacity doesn't mean I don't care. I'm here because I need a job, and I spoke to your son because no child should cry alone. The silence that followed was unbearable. Hartwell's jaw worked as though he were grinding down unspoken words. Then Diego began to fuss, his tiny hands reaching upward, his face crumpling with a cry. Rebecca instinctively lifted him into her arms, rocking gently. She hummed the same trembling lullaby her grandmother had once sung to her, soft and steady, her voice filling the cold, cavernous office with something human. Hartwell froze. The sound pierced through his armor, dragging memory up from the shadows. His late wife's voice warm, lilting, humming to Timothy in the dead of night when storms rattled the windows. For a moment, the unshakable CEO was no longer in his office tower. He was a younger man, standing in a nursery doorframe, watching his wife soothe their son with that same quiet tenderness. His throat tightened, but he forced himself back to the present, his expression snapping back into steel. That song, he muttered, his voice lower now. Where did you learn it? Rebecca blinked at him, confused. It was my grandmother's. She used to sing it when I was little. Hartwell's gaze darkened, not with anger, but with something else, something he didn't want her to see. He turned sharply, walking back to his desk. Sit, he ordered, gesturing to the chair across from him. Rebecca hesitated, then lowered herself slowly, Diego still nestled against her. The stroller sat at her side like a silent reminder of her reality. Hartwell folded his hands on the desk, leaning forward. I don't hire people off the street, and I don't let outsiders meddle in my family. His eyes bore into hers, sharp and relentless. But you did something no one else has managed in months. You made my son speak about what he feels. And you did it without bribery, without fear, without knowing who he even was. Her breath caught. She didn't know what to say. So here's your test, Ms. Martinez. He leaned closer, his presence suffocating. You want a job? Fine. I won't place you in a desk pushing papers. I will place you where the stakes are higher. My son. His voice was a command, but beneath it, a fracture of vulnerability trembled. If you can give him something no one else has managed, then perhaps you've earned your place here. Rebecca's eyes widened. You want me to look after him, to be with him, to show me this wasn't a fluke. His tone hardened again, walls slamming back into place. But understand this, if you fail him, if you harm him in any way, I will make sure you regret stepping through those doors. Rebecca swallowed hard, torn between fear and the spark of something she hadn't felt in months. Opportunity. She thought of the eviction notice taped to her door, of the bills gathering dust on the table, of Diego's future hanging by a thread. She also thought of Timothy, his tear-streaked face, his trembling voice as he confessed his fear of being abandoned. She drew in a steady breath, tightening her hold on Diego. Then give me the chance, she said firmly. I won't fail him. Hartwell leaned back in his chair, studying her like a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. The storm outside had stilled, but in that office, the air crackled with something far more dangerous. Neither of them knew it yet, but this uneasy bargain was only the beginning of a story that would unravel both their lives and bind them in ways neither expected. The next morning dawned gray, the kind of light that made the city look colorless. But inside the Hartwell estate, the air felt even heavier. Rebecca stood at the grand iron gates with Diego on her hip and the guard eyeing her with suspicion. The mansion loomed beyond, all stone pillars and glass windows that reflected wealth like a mirror meant to remind visitors of their place. She adjusted her grip on Diego and drew in a breath, her heart pounding. Yesterday's conversation in Alexander Hartwell's office still rang in her ears, his voice sharp, commanding, yet laced with something he hadn't meant to reveal. Vulnerability. The gates opened slowly, groaning like ancient doors, and Rebecca stepped onto the manicured path that wound toward the entrance. Every step felt like a test. Every glance from the staff waiting at the door a silent question. What is she doing here? Inside, the house stretched wide with ceilings painted like art galleries and halls lined with portraits of Hartwell ancestors. Rebecca felt Diego shift in her arms, his eyes wide at the dazzling chandeliers. She whispered against his hair, "We don't belong here, me Emmer. But maybe we'll change that." Timothy appeared at the top of the staircase, his small frame almost swallowed by the vastness around him. When he saw Rebecca, his face lit up with something no polished marble or golden chandelier could bring relief. He bounded down the steps and stopped shyly in front of her, glancing at Diego before whispering, "You came." Rebecca smiled softly. "Of course I came." From behind, Alexander's voice cut through the moment like a blade. "Timothy, upstairs. Tutors are waiting." The boy's face fell, but he obeyed instantly, his shoulders slumping as he trudged back up the stairs. Rebecca watched him go, her jaw tightening. When she turned, Alexander stood in the archway, his expression unreadable. Though his eyes flickered briefly to Diego before settling back on her, "You're here to do a job," he said flatly. "Nothing more. Don't mistake this for charity. Don't mistake my patience for softness." Rebecca's chin lifted, her voice steady. "I don't want charity, Mr. Hartwell. I just want the chance to prove myself." Something in her tone surprised him. For a moment his gaze softened, then hardened again as footsteps echoed around them. Whispers spread among the staff maids carrying trays, a butler adjusting his gloves, a housekeeper frowning at the sight of a young mother with a baby, standing in the middle of the Hartwell empire. Their eyes weren't cruel, but curious, skeptical. She wasn't one of them, and her presence made the walls of wealth feel uneasy. That first day was brutal. Tutors shot her sharp looks when Timothy's eyes drifted toward the door, hoping she might appear. The housekeeper muttered under her breath about outsiders meddling in family matters. Even the driver, who usually kept to himself, shook his head when Rebecca passed. It was as though the entire estate bristled against her, unwilling to accept that someone from cracked windows and unpaid rent could walk freely in their world. But Rebecca refused to bend. She sat with Timothy at lunch, listening as he pushed his food around the plate and spoke in broken whispers about missing his mother. She told him stories of strength, not grand tales, just simple memories of how her grandmother raised her with nothing but love and determination. She let Diego's laughter fill the silences that had haunted the mansion for too long. Slowly, Timothy's shoulders straightened. He began to laugh too, quietly at first, then louder, until the sound carried through the marble halls like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. That evening, when the house grew quiet, Rebecca rocked Diego in the small room they'd been given. Her body ached, her mind was heavy, but her heart stirred with something new hope. She hadn't just survived the day. She had given Timothy something his tutors, his staff, even his father had failed to give: comfort. Unseen, Alexander watched from the doorway, his face shadowed. He saw Timothy's smile, faint but real, as he whispered goodnight to Rebecca instead of his nanny. He saw his son reach out, not with hesitation, but with trust. And he saw the poor girl from the city, the one who shouldn't have belonged, fit into a space his wealth had never been able to fill. Alexander's chest tightened with something he didn't want to name. She was passing his test, but more dangerous than that, she was beginning to unravel him too. The Hartwell mansion was unusually quiet that night, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Rebecca sat in the library, its shelves towering around her. Diego asleep in his stroller beside her, and Timothy curled up on the couch with a book. He wasn't really reading. The fire in the hearth crackled, painting the room in soft orange light, but the silence pressed down heavy, thick with something unresolved. Rebecca felt it in her chest. This house, for all its grandeur, was starving for something simple, love. Timothy finally lowered the book and whispered, "Do you think my mom will ever come back?" His voice wavered, as fragile as the pages in his hands. Rebecca's heart clenched. She had no easy answers. She smoothed his hair gently and said, "Sometimes people leave because they don't know how to stay. But that doesn't mean you aren't worth staying for. You are, Timothy. You always were." The boy leaned into her touch, comforted in a way no tutor or nanny had ever managed. And as Rebecca spoke, she didn't realize that across the library, in the shadows near the doorway, Alexander Hartwell was listening. He had stood there for minutes, silent, watching, his face unreadable. The ruthless CEO who bent billion-dollar deals to his will suddenly felt like a stranger in his own house. This young woman, this poor girl with worn shoes and a baby in tow, had managed in weeks what he had failed to do in years. She had made his son smile again. She had restored something money had never bought back. Rebecca noticed him finally, his tall frame half hidden in the dark. She stiffened, instinctively protective of both children, though only one was hers. "Mr. Hartwell," she said softly, her voice low so as not to wake Diego. Alexander stepped into the light, his features hard, but his eyes betraying a storm inside. For a long moment he said nothing, just studied the scene, the boy leaning against her, the baby sleeping peacefully, the warmth in a house that had been cold for far too long. Then, almost reluctantly, he spoke. "Do you know why I chose to test you?" Rebecca's brows knit together, but she shook her head. "Because I wanted to see if you were like the rest. People come here, to me, because of what they want: money, status, power. They'll smile at Timothy, pat him on the head, but their eyes are always on me, on what I can give them. But you," his voice broke slightly before he controlled it again, "you looked at him. You listened. You cared. Without knowing his name, without asking for anything." The words lingered, heavy with a truth he rarely allowed himself to admit. His gaze dropped briefly, almost as if ashamed. "When I was a boy, my father left. He walked out one night and never came back. My mother raised me alone until her health gave way. I swore I would never be powerless again, that I would build something so strong no one could abandon me and leave me weak. And I did. I built this empire. But in the process," he hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Timothy, "I became the very thing I hated, absent, cold. I told myself it was strength, but it was just fear. Fear of being left again." Rebecca's breath caught. The unshakable Alexander Hartwell, confessing the wound at the core of his life. It was almost unthinkable. Yet here he stood, stripped of the armor that had made him untouchable. She rose slowly, Diego still asleep, and faced him squarely. "Your son doesn't need an empire, Mr. Hartwell. He doesn't need marble halls or trust funds. He needs you. Not the CEO, not the man who built glass towers. Just you, the father who chooses to stay." The words struck like lightning, illuminating every dark corner he had hidden for years. Alexander's chest heaved, his eyes locked on hers. And for the first time in decades, he didn't have an answer ready. He only had silence and the awareness that she was right. Timothy stirred, looking between them with wide, hopeful eyes. "Dad?" His small voice was a plea, a bridge between the man he feared and the man he needed. Alexander crossed the room slowly, his steps heavy but sure. He knelt in front of his son, his hand trembling as he rested it on Timothy's shoulder. "I'm here," he whispered hoarsely, "and I'm not going anywhere." The boy threw his arms around him, clutching his father as though afraid he might vanish again. Rebecca watched, her own throat tight, the firelight glinting off tears. Alexander didn't bother to hide Dot when he finally rose. His gaze turned to Rebecca. His voice was steadier now, the mask gone. "You've done something no one else could. You reminded me what matters. For that, your life will never be the same." Rebecca blinked, stunned, as he continued. "You won't worry about rent again. You won't wonder where your next meal will come from. But more than that, you've earned a place here. Not as charity, not as an employee, as someone who has given my son back his laughter. And in doing that, you gave me back something I thought was dead." Her hand tightened around Diego's stroller. She had come here chasing a job, a chance at survival. She had found something larger, dignity, belonging, and the power of her own compassion to change the life of the most untouchable man in Riverside. The storm outside the mansion had quieted, leaving only the crackle of firelight. For the first time in years, the Hartwell house felt alive, not because of wealth, but because of the fragile, powerful thread binding them together. A poor girl, her baby, a lonely boy, and a father learning to be human again. And as Rebecca whispered one final lullaby to Diego, Alexander lingered in the doorway, listening, not as a CEO, not as the man who commanded an empire, but as a father and as someone who, for the first time, believed he, too, had been saved.